Thank you for the intro. Voice interfaces are becoming an increasingly common mode of communication between us and our electronic devices. We use them everywhere, from our phones to our home assistants, to talk to our apps, and in the near future, our IoT devices. But in our rush to bootstrap these interfaces to every single electronic device you can get our hands on, we have failed to fully consider the security and privacy implications of using these devices. So for example, you, the good guys, need to be within a certain proximity of your home assistant to issue a successful audio command. But this creates a problem, because an attacker, if present within the same proximity, can also issue commands to your device. Now, realistically speaking, the attacker doesn't need to be in the same room or even the same house as the home assistant. Instead, the attacker can leverage any of these IoT devices. Now, we already know that these devices are just mired with vulnerabilities. So what an attacker can do is exploit any one of these devices hooked up with the speaker over the network, and then use those to issue commands to your device completely remotely. Now, you might be thinking to yourselves, well, this sounds kind of impractical. But let me give you an example of how this already has been demonstrated in the real world.
Which is unfortunately not enough time to explain all the fresh ingredients in the Whopper sandwich. But I got an idea. Okay, Google, what is the Whopper burger?
Now, 4 months ago, this would have actually triggered your home or Google phones to actually read out the ingredients. But Google had to force, stop this from happening, essentially block this specific audio command. But they can't block all these audio commands, right? Now, you might be thinking to yourselves that this attack was kind of funny, right? Essentially benign, because there was no maliciousness involved. But let me assure you that an attacker can cause much more damage. An attacker can force your home assistant to make illicit online purchases, or to unlock your expensive smart IoT devices, or smart locks. And as more and more banks opt for hands-free, voice-based banking, we are not far from the day when an attacker can also make illicit banking transactions using your home assistants. So it's definitely not benign. Well, is it easy to defend against? You might be thinking, well, you heard the attack audio, right? So it must be easy to defend against. But I wouldn't be so sure about that. What if we could generate an attack audio sample that sounds like noise to the human ear, but to the model that is a legitimate audio command? Because if it sounds like noise to you, you'll probably just ignore it as just garbage. And your home assistant will execute that malicious command in the background without you ever knowing. So that is the kind of question that our work tries to answer. Is there a generic and transferable way to produce the audio that sounds like noise to the humans, sounds like a valid command to the system? To add to that, our work works against both speech models that convert audio to text, and speaker recognition models that use your voice to authenticate you. And we achieve all of this in a completely black box setting. Now, I want you guys to note that black box is the most restrictive access type available to the attacker. The attacker doesn't know the model weights. The attacker doesn't know the model architecture. The attacker doesn't even know the model type being employed under the hood. So essentially, the attacker doesn't know anything. But before I talk about our attack, let me introduce you to the modern speech recognition technology that makes voice interfaces a reality. So we start off with the speech recognition pipeline, which is made up of 4 phases. The first is the audio sample, which is recorded and digitized using a microphone. It's then passed on to pre-processing. Now, here you can remove all that rudimentary noise, any sort of high frequencies, using a low-pass filter. After that, you pass on this cleaned audio for feature extraction. And I'll talk more about feature extraction in just a second. But for now, think of feature extraction as a very complex filter. It retains only the most important aspects of speech, called the feature vector, and discards everything else. Now, it's also important to note that the feature extractor is lossy, because it compresses a very high dimensional input, that is speech, to a very low dimensional output, that is a feature vector. The feature vector is then passed on to the model for inference. Now, there has been a lot of really good work here attacking the model stage of the speech recognition pipeline. But what we do is significantly different. We attack the feature extraction phase. And that's because this lossy compression that's happening during the feature extraction, there are many, many audio samples that can collide to have the exact same feature vector. And that's that collision that our attack essentially exploits. And in doing so, we can find two different audio samples, right? One noisy sample and one clean sample that collide to the exact same feature vector. So when the feature vector is actually passed to the model will be unable to tell whether this feature vector came from a legitimate audio sample or an attack audio sample. And that brings me to the central thesis of my talk today. As long as we can find these collisions in feature space, the model does not matter, making our attack black box. Now, let's talk about feature extraction real quick. So feature extraction is designed to approximate the human ear. It only retains the information that the human ear finds most important while discarding the rest. One of the most commonly used techniques as part of feature extraction is the magnitude fast Fourier transform, or the magnitude FFT. The way the magnitude FFT works is that it converts a time domain signal into the frequency domain. What that means is, if I give the magnitude FFT a sample of your speech, it will spit out the frequencies that make up that speech sample. But there's a catch. Multiple inputs can have the exact same output. And that's because, as I said previously, or as I alluded to, the magnitude FFT is very lossy. And let me illustrate that with a very simple example. Let's start off with a sine wave. What I do next is I phase shift that sine wave 180 degrees. Now, phase is just like the location of a particle in a wave, right? Now, these two waves are kind of different. But once I pass them through the magnitude FFT, I get the exact same output. There's a collision going on. And that's because the magnitude FFT ignores the information about the phase and ignores the information about time as well. It's time invariant. And that is essentially how our attack works. We try to come up with inputs of speech that, using very simple transformations, that can generate, that can collide to the feature vector of a clean audio sample, but are noisy to the human ear. In our work, we group these perturbation techniques into 4 types. So let's start off with an original audio sample, or a sine wave right here. The first technique, time domain inversion. Here what we do is we take small windows of the sine wave and just flip it across the y-axis. Now this adds discontinuities to the sine wave, as you can see, and makes the sine wave kind of noisy, which is fine because the feature vector still remains intact, or relatively intact. The next technique is random phase generation. Here we take small windows of the sine wave again and essentially come up with a new arrangement of the particles such that the feature vector still remains the same. Now, getting the window size right, or like getting the arrangement of the particles right, is kind of tricky. And for any of you interested, I both suggest you read the paper. The third technique is high frequency addition. Now, we already know that the human ear is incredibly sensitive to high frequencies. And if these high frequencies have enough intensity, they can actually mask the underlying signal. And I don't want you to confuse these high frequencies with the dolphin attack, which essentially added ultrasound frequencies. No, our frequencies are very audible, so much so that they actually mask the underlying signal. Now, what's also important to know that even though you or your ear can hear these frequencies, the model can't. And that's because during feature extraction, these frequencies are filtered out, essentially. And that's because during feature extraction, high frequencies are assigned lesser weight. And that's because most of the speech audio content is in the lower frequencies. And the third perturbation we introduce is time scaling. Essentially, what we try to capture is a fast-speaking person. We essentially increase the tempo of the audio sample. And that's because a slow speaker is relatively easier to understand, and a fast speaker is difficult to understand. And that's the kind of intuition that we were trying to capture. Now that you have all 4 perturbations available to you in your arsenal, what you can do is you can take a normal audio sample, here for the word pay, and perturb it to generate a new audio sample, which will be transcribed as the word pay, but will be intelligible to the human ear. Now, you might be asking yourselves, well, how do you measure intelligibility, right? The thing is, it's pretty hard to measure. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is, well, there is no widely accepted metric to measure the audio, the quality of your audio sample. You might say, well, why not just use the quality of VoIP codecs or the telephony codecs? But the problem is they try to capture things such as jitter or packet loss, things that we fundamentally do not target in our attack. The other reason you can't measure audio quality or intelligibility is there are just too many factors. Factors such as age, health, background, race, first language. And these kind of factors make any sort of user study extraordinarily difficult to carry out. And I know some papers have actually tried doing that, these Amazon Turk studies, but they have ignored these factors. So what we do instead is we go to the speech recognition community, and we use the fundamentals of psychoacoustics. We use these fundamentals to prove that our attack audio is difficult to understand. And essentially what we do is spread the energy across the spectrum. So let's start off with a simple example. Here's the spectrum of the original audio sample. On the x-axis is time. On the y-axis is frequency. And the lighter areas, or the bright areas, are the energy. What we want to do is to make our audio sample more like white noise, where the energy is spread across the spectrum. But this is what essentially will do, essentially mask the underlying signal. And if you look at our attack audio, that's exactly what we do. Essentially, we add more energy in the higher frequencies. And in doing so, we're actually masking the underlying speech command. And if you compare all three audio samples, you see that our attack audio is more similar to white noise than the original attack audio sample. Now, we evaluated our attack algorithm against multiple systems. We attacked speech recognition systems, where we want to convert noise into targeted text, and speaker recognition systems, where we want noise to be authenticated as a target user. We were able to generate more than 20,000 attack audio samples and successfully test across 22 different speakers. And that was because it takes our algorithm about 10 queries to the model to generate a single attack audio sample, which is just a few seconds per a successful attack audio sample. Now, most of the work that has delved into this problem have looked at one or at most two models. In contrast, by attacking the feature extraction phase, we have been able to look at models from companies such as Google, Microsoft Bing, two models from Microsoft Azure, Intel, IBM, Mozilla, and many, many more models. Now, most of these models, as you might know, are proprietary. There's no publicly available information about them. So what we have shown is that ultimately, it is completely possible to attack these models in completely black box settings. And now that I've got you guys all excited, I'll give you a demo of our attack audio samples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play two audio samples, and what I want you to do is try to figure out what's being said in the sample. It's OK if you didn't understand it, and I'll play it again for you. So what was being said in the attack audio sample was turn on the computer. Now, when I play this attack audio sample again, you'll actually hear the command. And that was because your brain has been primed to hear for that specific command. Right? So I'm sure like most of you understood the command this time. So let's do another demo. Now, again, I'll play the audio, and I want you to figure out what's being said in the command.
Make a phone call to mom.
Again, many of you might not have understood the command, and that's completely fine. Now, what we do is, this attack audio sample was actually successfully tested against my Google Speech on my phone. Let's see what happens when I play it against my phone.
Make a phone call to mom.
So essentially what happened is that audio command that sounded like garbage to you, and which you'd probably ignore, was actually a command to my phone to make a call to my mother. Now that I've demonstrated how our attack works and demoed the audio for you, let's look at what I want you to take away from my talk today. First of all, what we've introduced are simple and efficient audio transformation that yield noise that is understood as commands by speech systems. And our specific attack targeted the feature extraction phase, which meant that the model was irrelevant. And we also show that all the systems we tested were vulnerable against this sort of attack. And lastly, I hope that I have been able to convince you today that we can achieve the exact same goals as traditional adversarial machine learning without knowing absolutely anything about the model. And with that, I will take easy questions.
Hi, Yunhan from Baidu. So I'm wondering, is there any physical constraints, like the background noise, when you're doing that attack in physical world, like attacking?
So the attack audio I played for you right now was actually with the white noise generator running in the background. But for sure, if there's enough noise in the background, the attack won't work. Just as like if there's enough noise in the background, your legitimate audio command won't work either. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so the digital noise, the digital adversarial noise you generated, do you need to make some other transformations when applying, like playing through some speaker to attack the phone?
So you're asking, can you repeat the question?
I mean, do you need to do extra transformations when playing that sound in physical settings?
Oh, no, so like nothing extra. So what we did was we just, same perturbations we made for like a local attack, we just played over the speaker, and we have details in the paper on how to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Sorry. My name is Tatsuyamori from Waseda University. What is good countermeasures against this attack?
Countermeasure? Oh,
yes.
That is a wonderful question. I'll tell you why it's great. Because I have a slide for that. So, and that's not, yeah, no, that's not the slide. Yeah, defenses, yeah. So any sort of defense that you implement has to be implemented before the feature extraction phase or at the feature extraction phase, right? Because anything after that, the model doesn't know the difference. So let's talk about the things really quickly that won't work. Adversarial training, will that work? Well, the problem with adversarial training is your model accuracy will go down, right? And as this market is supposed to reach 24 billion in valuation dollars, I don't think people would want their models to be inaccurate. Will voice activity detection work? VADs or voice activity detection are simple algorithms that tell whether an audio sample has speech or noise. Because we are targeting the psychoacoustics, right, or the human ear, that can tell the difference. That will say, oh, this is still speech, but it's your ear that is not working as expected. Environmental noise, as I just pointed out, that can actually reduce the accuracy of the attack. But we see the most potential in liveness detection. Essentially, liveness detection is algorithms that try to differentiate between whether an audio sample was created by an actual speaker, like a mechanical speaker, or an organic user, like a human, right? And one of the most promising results are the one from Bulu et al. He's in the audience today, so you can go talk to him as well. But essentially what it does is it looks at the spectrogram and says, there are some frequencies that a speaker just cannot make, like a mechanical speaker. And that is why we can say with significant guarantees that this audio sample was actually generated by a mechanical speaker. I hope that helps.
We got next in the back.
Hi, Roland from NUS. So you mentioned that your goal was to sort of make it sound like white noise, but it doesn't sound like white noise at all to me, actually.
Oh, so yeah, it does not sound like white noise, but intuitively, that was the idea we're trying to capture.
So there are two questions coming from
Yes.
that. One is whether, is it possible to have it sound like white noise?
Well, that's a wonderful
That's
research
one thing.
question.
Like, so then it's like, you turn on the TV and there's nothing happening, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that'll be an interesting research question to explore,
So
for
then
sure.
the other one is whether is it possible to mask it as other signal content, like sound as music, for example?
And I think there has been work done on that already. So essentially hiding audio commands in music. So there was,
if it's vocals or something like this.
yeah, so there was a really good paper at Usenix this year, I think. So you should probably go look at that. Wonderful paper.
So since we started early, I think we have time for 2 more questions, first in the back, then in the front.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Stoltzfus from Georgia Institute of Technology. I was wondering, to what degree do you quantitatively measure an audio sample as being not understandable by humans versus, at what point do you consider it not understandable by humans quantitatively, I suppose?
So in our work, at least what we did was we compared our attack audio samples with previous attack audio samples that were already published. And the community agrees that those audio samples are difficult to understand. And because the example I gave you, the white noise thing, right?
Right.
That was the comparison that we used. So if it's better than the previous attack audio samples, then I think we're on the right track. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
This is Liang from Georgia Tech. So I realize this paper is a very nice paper. It reminds me of the paper in the 2016, the hidden voice attacks and in Usenix. So could you please just briefly tell me what is the major difference of your work between your work and their work is that you are using model-agnostic attacking methods?
So that's a good question.
So what is the main difference between your work and?
So they presented two types of attacks. It was black box and white box, and the author sitting next to you, which is perfect. But like the one of the major contributions we had was we could achieve like the same degree of intelligibility or lack thereof without knowing anything about the model.
Okay, so so what if I realize that in your paper you have to dependent on the fact that they are using FFT.
Yes.
So magnitude FFT. What if they use end-to-end direct recognition deep neural networks to do that?
That is a great question. So even in end-to-end systems, if you look at any end-to-end systems, it actually starts with a magnitude FFT. That's the first step that any system that I've come across uses.
Okay.
So you are still using the magnitude FFT.
Okay, but I believe there might be no. Okay. Okay.